I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of UN Women Austria to our roundtable today. My name is Mariella Rieder and I'm the Vice President of UN Women Austria. And UN Women Austria is the Austrian National Committee of UN Women, which is headquartered in New York. And as such, our mission is to support the goals and projects of UN Women. And our main aim is to empower and strengthen the rights of women and girls, to end violence against women and girls, and to contribute to achieving gender equality in Austria and worldwide. And today we have the honor to welcome two guest speakers, Carolina Gonzalez and Helen Hellbauer. And Carolina Gonzalez is Senior Gender Coordinator at UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. She contributes to the implementation of the Secretariat's policy on gender equality and the empowerment of women, including facilitating knowledge development and the integration of gender considerations into institutional strategies, policies, and programmatic work. Our second guest speaker is Helen Hellbauer, who is a human rights lawyer currently serving as gender expert at UNIDO. She contributes to the integration of gender equality into inclusive and sustainable industrial development, including the incorporation of gender considerations into policies, programs, and partnerships. And she brings experience across United Nations agency in advancing gender and human rights agendas. Our guest speakers will be talking to us today about women in industry and what needs to change for equal opportunities, for which we are very pleased to welcome the audience as well. And with this, I'm very happy to hand over to you, Carolina and Helen.
Thank you very much. I will wait for Carolina to share the screen. Perfect. So good evening, everyone, and many thanks to UN Women Austria and Mariella for the kind invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here today. This is actually my third time joining a roundtable with UN Women Austria, and yeah, I'm very glad to be back. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So today we will reflect on women's role in industry. I will be sharing what the data shows us and where do we currently stand. So I will start by setting the scene, looking at current trends and why women's participation in industry matters. Then I will move into key barriers that women face and finally share, on a positive note, some practical lessons from UNIDO's work. And that will be the point of showing what needs to change to ensure equal opportunities and what do we know that works based on UNIDO projects and programs. Then I will hand over to my colleague Carolina, who will walk us through case-by-case concrete examples from UNIDO's work, and then give us insights on, I'm very excited about this, the first ever International Day of Women in Industry to be celebrated next week on the 21st of April. So let's start by setting the scene. To start, it's really important for us to look at where women currently stand in industry so that we understand the current scenario. What we know is that globally, women represent around 30% of the manufacturing workforce, to give an example. However, we see that this representation actually decreases at higher levels, with women holding only about 24% of senior leadership positions. So what becomes clear here is that, and even more important than these numbers, not only how many women are in industry that matters for us, but where they are positioned within industry. When we look at the data, we see that women are disproportionately concentrated in lower paid, lower value, and often more insecure roles, including administrative positions or informal segments of value chains. And of course, this is not something that is unique to industry. We see the same pattern across many sectors. We know that in many companies, women are often in support roles, such as working as assistants, note takers, HR functions, while we know that men are more likely to occupy in decision-making positions. And we know that these patterns are not accidental. It's not just the way that it is, but they are shaped by long-standing gender bias and stereotypes, about what is considered women's work and what is considered men's work. And what we see in industry when we look at these numbers in the slide is essentially a reflection of these broader dynamics on gender stereotypes and bias, where women are concentrated in lower value segments, while higher value technical and leadership roles remain dominated by men. At the same time, the gender pay gap remains significant, often ranging between 15 to 20% in industrial economies. So the key issue is not simply the participation figures, but it is whether women have equal access to quality jobs, opportunities, and career progression within industry. Third slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. So why does this gap persist? The answer actually lies within the structural inequalities within the industry itself. First, as I just mentioned, we see strong occupational segregation. So women are often concentrated in lower value roles, while men dominate technical, operational, and managerial positions. Second, there's often what is referred to as the sticky floor effect. This refers to situations where women actually do enter the workforce, but face significant barriers to upward mobility. And this is more significantly reflected in promotion rates. In some sector, for example, I have here in the slide data from the food industry. We see that only around 2.7% of women are promoted from entry level to managerial roles, compared to over 10% of men. In addition, women often have less access to leadership pathways, mentorship, and professional networks, and we know that all of which are critical for career progression. So what we are seeing is not just a gap in participation figures, but it's actually a structural pattern that limits how far women can advance within industry. Next slide, please. What is important to understand here is that these structural inequalities that we are talking about are not only a social concern, but they have direct implications for industrial development. Today's women's employment to population ratio is around 46% compared to nearly 70% for men. And this gap represents a significant underutilization of human capital. In other words, economies are not fully using the skills and potential available to them. And this leads to an inefficient allocation of labor and skills, which directly affects, of course, productivity, competitiveness, long-term growth, and in general, industrial development. So gender equality is not only about what is fair or what is ethical, but it has real economic consequences for how industries perform. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the GDP, of course, the economic case is very, very clear. We know that if women were to participate in the economy identical to men, the global GDP could increase by as much as 28 trillion US dollars, which creates a 26% increase from where we currently stand. A study from the World Bank further estimates that on average across countries, closing gender employment gaps would raise long-term GDP per capita by almost 20%, and this is a significant number. So the research clearly shows us that countries that integrate more women into labor force experience faster and more sustainable economic growth. A country example here would be Japan, where we know that Japan has struggled for decades actually with low growth and an aging workforce. And they saw the effects of gender equality in countering this, where they have introduced numerous initiatives to encourage women's participation in the economy and hence industrial development. So it's clear that gender equality increases the overall labor supply, diversifies the workforce, and supports more stable long-term growth trajectories. The research shows us that at the industry level, as you can see in the slide, with higher female labor force participation grow relatively faster than in countries with greater gender equality. So, for example, I added some data in the slide, which shows growth by 1.7 percentage points in value added and 1.2 percentage points in labor productivity. But How so? So it's important to explain these numbers. So this is because gender equality enables firms to allocate labor resources more efficiently and make better use of available talent, driving productivity, competitiveness, and industrial performance. At the firm level, there is also really strong evidence showing us that companies with greater gender diversity show stronger performance, including higher innovation rates, better decision making, and improved financial results. So, investing in gender equality is not just about fairness or that is the right thing to do or a social objective, but it is also a proven strategic investment. Next slide, please. So the question becomes clear. If the economic case is so clear and we have such undeniable data, the question remains, why are these gains are not being realized? And the answer lies in a set of structural constraints, really, that shape women's participation in the economy and therefore also in industry. First, women have less access to economic resources, including land, finance, and productive assets. And this limits their ability to start or scale a business and to move into higher value economic activities. Second, women carry a disproportionate share of unpaid care work. And this includes not only childcare that we know, but also housework and increasing elder care. So the elder care responsibilities also go under this, and these are responsibilities that are often invisible but very time intensive. As a result, we see that many women face what we call the time poverty, which limits their ability to participate in training, take on full-time jobs, or progress in their careers. And this is not only a household issue, really, it's also a policy issue where governments invest in care infrastructure such as available childcare services or support for elder care. We tend to see higher female labor force participation and more equal access to economic opportunities for women. So addressing care responsibilities is essential if we want to create genuinely equal opportunities for women in industry. Third point that I have here is that women are more likely to experience economic vulnerability, including higher rates of extreme poverty. And of course, this affects both access to employment and the type and quality of jobs available to them. Finally, what I have here is safety and mobility constraints, such as access to safe transport, secure working environments, and these can directly restrict women's participation in industrial opportunities. So these factors help explain us why, despite this strong economic case, women remain underrepresented in industry. In other words, the issue is not only what happens inside the industry, but also the conditions that shape who can participate in it. And this applies to any system, really, no? So what ultimately matters in any system is who is able to access it and benefit from it. And today, too many women are still excluded from fully benefiting from the opportunities that industrial development can offer them. Next slide, please. So where exactly do these barriers appear? We see barriers across the entire pathway, really, from entering industry, staying in jobs, into progressing into leadership. At entry stage, we see women face several interconnected barriers that all reinforce each other. First, participation in STEM and technical education pathways remains really limited. This is often shaped by this social norms that I talked about and expectations that influence career choices from an early age, what we think about what can be a woman's job and what can be a man's job. And of course, this shapes the reality from the very beginning. Second, even when women do access training, there's often a very big mismatch between the skills that they actually acquire and what industry demands. This gap is often more pronounced for women who are frequently steered towards lower value training pathways and have fewer links to employers in male-dominated sectors. And finally, school to work transitions are also often weak. Women may complete training, but they lack networks, information, and support needed to enter industrial employment. When we go to the other side, retention, on the other hand, is strongly shaped by workplace conditions, really. So in many industrial settings, workplaces are simply not designed with women in mind, whether in terms of infrastructure, working hours, or safety. For example, lack of safe transport or childcare can make it difficult for women to remain in employment, even when they do have necessary skills, they completed the trainings and actually did enter the workforce and started working. So working hours may also be incompatible with care responsibilities, which disproportionately fall on women. UNIDO experience shows us that relatively practical interventions can actually make a significant difference. My colleague Carolina will go into case-by-case analysis later, but to give a small example, we have a project in India where we saw from a UNIDO project that companies that introduced gender-responsive workplace measures, including childcare support, safe transport, and improved facilities, saw women's participation increase from around 5% to as much as 50%. And this is such a significant increase. So this shows us that retention is not about women dropping out, but it is about whether workplaces are really designed to enable them to stay. And lastly, advancement is often where the largest gaps emerge. So even with women enter and actually do remain in industry, they face barriers in progressing into higher level roles. What this means for us is that this is this includes several factors, but mostly this includes biases in recruitment and promotion systems, as well as limited access to mentorship and leadership pathways, as I mentioned. But we see that women are also often excluded from informal networks, which play a key role in career advancement. So what is important is challenging many of these barriers are not visible. So they're embedded in organizational cultures and practices. This is why they are sometimes harder to address, but they have a significant impact on outcomes. Next slide, please. So moving on to a more positive aspect, good news is that we have strong evidence on what works. Across different contexts, we see consistent patterns in the types of interventions that make difference. That doesn't mean that we have a one fits for all approach. This is certainly not the case, but we see a general pattern showing that what matters in creating real change. There are various areas to mention, and this is in no way the whole picture, but I will highlight a few key areas where we see continuous impact. For example, one of the key areas we see impact on the slide on the left side is in skill systems. This, of course, includes training, but effective approaches that go beyond training alone. These are the ones that manage to link skills development directly to employment opportunities. This includes combining technical skills with soft skills, of course, and ensuring that training programs are aligned with what is on demand in the labor market. I will give some examples from UNIDO work, although Carolina will go case by case. But in Ethiopia, for example, UNIDO supported a program in the textile sector that trained over 1,200 participants, with women representing more than 80%. And this led to the creation of over 6,700 jobs, with the majority of these filled by women, and also supported women in moving into technical and more supervisory roles. This shows us that when skill systems are designed effectively, they can significantly improve women's participation and progression. Another important area is access to value chains. So we said a couple of times that women are often concentrated in lower value segments, which limits their income and opportunities. So supporting women to move into higher value roles and access to markets and finance, it's critical. So a good example from UNIDO project comes from Egypt this time, where in Egypt we had a project where many women were producing agricultural products such as palm dates and medicinal plants, really. And they were producing these products often from their homes or small workshops in their community, but it remained low value and in informal segments. Through a UNIDO supported program, we created this project where they improved product quality. Of course, this comes through training, but also accessed business services and were connected to international markets. So within this project, for example, we connected rural women in Egypt to go to international markets, international trade fairs around Europe. And this enabled them to move into higher value segments of global value chains, with some securing orders from international buyers. And this was really life-changing for them. So this shows us that how value chain interventions creating access for women in rural communities can have a strong impact on both economic empowerment, but also industrial competitiveness for states. And the workplace transformation is another critical area. This includes, of course, both policies such as anti-harassment measures and equal pay policies, but also practical improvements such as safe facilities and transport. It also requires leadership commitment. Of course, it starts at the very top to creating inclusive workplace cultures that is free from harassment and free from everyday sexism. Evidence shows us that such measures lead not only to higher retention of women workers, but also to improved productivity and overall performance. So we see that investing in inclusive workplaces benefits both workers and also businesses. So the key lesson across all these 3 points is that all of this is not a single intervention. Just having one of them is not sufficient. And the real impact comes from a really systemic approach combining skills, workplace, access to markets and finance, and supportive policies that enables them to do so, and many more. And these elements really reinforce each other, and together they create these conditions for women to enter, remain in, and advance within industry. Next slide, please. So I'm going towards the end and I will hand it over to Carolina. I just wanted to say that we have many more examples from UNIDO best practices publications. These are the ones in the slide. The left one was published on last year, and the one on the right is our second edition, which will be published next week, marking the first International Day of Women in Industry. And they include case-by-case analysis on UNIDO projects and programs into what we see that works. And to bring all these approaches we talked about to life, I will hand over now to Carolina, who will share concrete examples, like I said, from these two publications, really, showcasing UNIDO's work through case-by-case country examples, and also reflect on the background and the broader global momentum on first ever International Day of Women in Industry. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to, I'm not sure how to put on my mic while sharing, so I will share again. Great. Thank you very much, Helen, for that great introduction. Hello to all. It's a pleasure to be here. So Helen gave a very good overview of why UNIDO does the work we do, of why it's so important to promote gender equality and empowerment of women in the development work that we do. For those of you that don't know us as well, UNIDO is a specialized agency of the United Nations system, and our mandate is to promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization. So we do that through three main areas. We create fair and sustainable supply chains. We work to end hunger through innovation and agribusiness. And we drive climate change and sustainable industries. And the barriers and challenges that Helen's presented so well are the ones that we try to address through our projects, while addressing things like climate action or hunger. It's important to look at that from an inclusive point of view, and the role of women in industry is so vital to addressing those. So I'd like to give you a few examples of how we do that in our projects, kind of to bring the theory down to the ground. And I'll be sharing these 5 examples that you can see right now on the slide. I'm going to start with the global example, focus on skills. What we see across many countries is that women simply do not enter technical and industrial training at the same rate as men. Many times this is due because of stereotypes and unsafe training environments, like we just heard. So through this learning and knowledge development facility program, UNIDO works to make vocational training genuinely inclusive, adapting facilities, offering flexible schedules, showcasing female role models, and crucially linking training directly to employers. The results are that women, as you can see below, women are trained as bus drivers, heavy machine operators, as water technicians, with higher income and much stronger entry into formal technical jobs. This shows that when vocational training systems are designed inclusively, women move into roles that are traditionally closed to them. Similar as in that global LKDF project, this is one of the ones that Helen mentioned in India, the Uday Pride project. And here we were also dealing with a sector where women's participation was extremely low in the automotive manufacturing sector. This low representation was largely driven by cultural norms, employer bias, skills gap, and very basic issues like safe transport or facilities. So the Uday Pride project worked directly with companies, not just workers. It combined gender sensitization with technical and industry 4.0 training, mentoring women in concrete workplace improvements such as childcare, transport, and sanitation. There was also an important component that recognized the companies that introduced these policies and awarded them in a public space to recognize the important work that they've done. In some companies, women's participation rose as much as 50%. Productivity increased, and women began moving into supervisory and leadership roles, showing that it's not just about social issues and inclusion, but about productivity. In the next example, in Colombia, this is the GMAP is the Global Market Access Program. And here we can see how gender equality can directly improve competitiveness of a company. The GMAP project in Colombia works in the aquaculture sector, where women are heavily concentrated in low-paid processing roles, and almost no gender data existed in this sector. Also, infrastructure wasn't designed for women, and leadership roles were almost entirely dominated by men. Through the GMAP program, UNIDO started with a solid gender analysis value chain and introduced gender markers to track results. It also worked with companies on voluntary standards around equal pay and facilities. What change was important? Women moved into leadership positions, gender-responsive policies were adopted for the first time, and companies realized that meeting gender standards actually helped them access higher value markets. So equality in this case became an asset for the businesses and an advantage that made them more competitive. In this example from Egypt, the Rabeha project, we can see how working along the value chain can really also have transformational changes. In Egypt, many women are active in production, but mostly in low value segments with little access to finance, markets, or formal jobs. So the Rabeha project tackled these root causes through gender-responsive value chain development. That meant creating or combining employability and entrepreneurship training, incubation and business acceleration, and tailored financial advice, and building those stronger links with ethical global supply chains. As a result, women-led businesses didn't just survive, they grew, they thrived, and their products reached international markets, reaching places like Paris. Women shifted from informal activity into competitive, export-oriented production, making it clear how access to market can also transform women's economics. And in my final example, returning to South America, we have the RIFE project. This works in the renewable energy and finance sector. And it shows us how gender can be built into systems from the start. Uruguay is undertaking its second energy transition, so it already has a very strong, it is already powered by largely by renewable energy. It is a sector that's growing fast, but is also very much male-dominated. So without any intervention, the green transition risked reproducing old inequalities. And through the RIFE project, gender equality was embedded directly into climate finance. Investment decisions included gender criteria. Companies were supported to adopt the women's empowerment principles, and banks integrated gender into their learning processes. Also, women received leadership training in the energy sector. The outcome was structural change. Women moved into leading positions, more women were incorporated into the workforce, and gender equality became part of how climate finance works. Not as an add-on, but part of the structural change. And I think it's an excellent model and a strong model for inclusive green transition. Excuse me. So we tried to take examples from different parts of the world and are facing different issues, all mentioned by Helen in the introduction. And we can see commonalities across these different sectors and regions. First, gender gaps are rarely about women's capabilities. They are about how systems are designed. So whether we're talking about skills training, workplaces, value chains, or finance, the barriers are structural. Second, what works consistently is that tackling these barriers at the system level. These projects combine skills with jobs, training with workplaces, women's participation with market incentives, and gender equality with competitiveness. And finally, when gender is built into how industries function, the results go far beyond inclusion. We see higher productivity, stronger and more resilient value chains, and better access to markets and finance. In other words, these examples show that gender is not just the right thing to do. It's smart. It's good for business. So all this work that UNIDO does in promoting gender equality, the empowerment of women, and sustainable industrialization brought us to a big milestone last year when our member states, so the countries that form part of UNIDO, established the International Day of Women in Industry. This was adopted by our General Conference in November of last year, which means that we are celebrating our first International Day of Women next week on April 21st. Why did the member states consider that this was important to establish this day? And it's to address some of those structural barriers, such as women, the lack of representation or the low representation in manufacturing, in green and digital industries, and in leadership roles, and to address those persistent barriers in finance and networks, in technology, and with skills. And they saw it as an opportunity to close the gap and accelerate inclusive industrial transformation. So we are organizing this day next week. On the first hand, this day is meant to honor the important contribution of women across different sectors of industry, to raise awareness about the importance of their contributions, to elevate their role in industrial transformation, and to strengthen the global momentum in a moment where sometimes the progress being made in these issues is stagnating or even declining. And while we celebrate the accomplishments to date, it's also a reminder and an opportunity to reflect on the remaining challenges and how to address these structural barriers. We'll be presenting these best practices, the publications, and have an exhibit to showcase areas where things work and change has been achieved. And we also are using it as an opportunity to enhance partnerships across governments, private sector, civil society, and other development organizations. The day we will have in the morning a high-level opening session where we're setting the stage for the school observance. We'll also have an award ceremony recognizing champions, both within our programs, but also partners, governments, local governments, or other key partners who are doing really amazing work in this area. We have an exhibit that will be running for most of the week at our Vienna International Center. And we also have in the afternoon a panel discussion recognizing the importance of measuring progress and what are the metrics that matter, measuring and steering industrial transformation through gender lens. And here we'll be looking at how gender disaggregated industrial statistics combined with insights from AI, digitalization, and advanced manufacturing trends can drive evidence-based industrial policies for competitive, green, and digitally enabled economies. You are all warmly invited to participate. We have a QR code here, which you can scan, and that will lead you to our website where you can have more information and register for the event if you are in Vienna. Or you can also follow us online, where we will have a live broadcast on UN TV. And we really want to make a big moment of this first celebration to set the stage for future celebrations and to really recognize the importance of continuing this work in gender equality and empowerment of women in the industrial sector. So with that, and I will put maybe a link in the chat where you can also go to directly and access our page. And with that, we will conclude and we are open for your questions. Thank you very much.